Hey everybody, Professor Bentley here with the second of two short videos explaining the Unit 4 discussion board. In this video, I will be going over the 4 topics that you can go over within this assignment. And remember, these are all very interesting topics and there's plenty of research material available. So just pick the one that interests you the most and go for it. Okay, so the first topic that you can go over is a primary document which covers the passage of the Tax Equity and Responsibility Act of 1981. So it's actually an interview with President Ronald Reagan about the passage of this law and how it will impact our nation's economics. Okay, so to understand this primary document, you need to have some background information on Reaganomics. Reaganomics was Reagan's economic policy. When Reagan was sworn into office in January of 1981, the economy was still suffering from the slow economic growth and inflation that had plagued both Ford and Carter. Reagan's goal was to increase the amount of spending money every American had in his or her pocket. So he instituted an economic program that the press dubbed Reaganomics. Reagan put into place tax cuts for the wealthy and said that the wealth will trickle down to the lower and middle classes. Okay, Reagan was a huge fan of smaller government and he felt that the middle class would benefit from simpler tax codes. He cut about $41 billion from the federal budget, and much of that was money for social programs. Supply-side economics is an aspect of Reaganomics you need to know. It's basically the idea that cutting taxes for big businesses will cause the wealth to trickle down to the lower and middle classes. To really judge whether or not Reaganomics was successful, you have to look at how the lower and middle classes fared during his 8 years in office. The Tax Equity and Responsibility Act, remember Reagan is being interviewed after just signing this into law. This closed tax loopholes and restricted benefits in pension plans. This was Reagan's way of dealing with the national debt without having to raise taxes. He hoped to raise enough money to pay off the national debt with this. It didn't exactly work. It helped out somewhat, but didn't work as much as they had hoped. The gap between the rich and the poor continued to grow during Reagan's 8 years in office. He did not increase minimum wage while he was president, and he cut federal funding for firefighters, policemen, and education while he was president. Single mom households and African American households saw the biggest decline in income. 1984, Reagan further slashed tax rates for the wealthy and caused an even larger national debt. Okay, so the second topic you can choose from is a famous speech regarding Iraqi aggression that was given by George H.W. Bush in October of 1990 before the United Nations General Assembly. So to understand this primary document, you have to have a good grasp of the background to the first Gulf War. August 2nd, 1990, Iraqi forces invaded and took over Kuwait. Kuwait is a very oil-rich nation. President George H.W. Bush was president at the time. George H.W. Bush was very good at foreign policy. Remember, I say presidents fall into one or two categories, either being very good at domestic policy or very good at foreign policy. And Bush was very good at foreign policy. And Bush had served in many aspects of government, and he had served 8 years as Reagan's vice president before being elected president himself. So President Bush immediately demanded the withdrawal of Iraqi forces from Kuwait. Remember, in the first Gulf War, my dear students, the United States was the head of United Nations coalition forces. And the United Nations coalition forces were based in Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia allowed UN coalition forces, to be based within their nation because they figured that they're also a very oil-rich nation. They figured that if the Iraqis were going over and taking over Kuwait, that they would be next because they were also oil-rich. Since the U.S. had previously been an ally of Iraq, Saddam Hussein dared to invade and take over Kuwait. He felt the U.S. would not militarily intervene when he invaded Kuwait. He underestimated the U.S. Coalition forces quickly liberated Kuwait and headed into Iraq. Even though coalition forces had won the war, Saddam Hussein remains in power. He would remain in power until 2003. President George H.W. Bush gave this important speech in front of the United Nations General Assembly October 1st, 1990. The speech is the primary document. The speech occurred 2 months after the Iraqi invasion and takeover of Kuwait. Bush condemned the Iraqi aggression and called on members of the United Nations to demand a return of Kuwait to the Kuwaitis. And he said that the United Nations can aid nations to band together to prevent aggression and punish those responsible. All right, the third topic that you can go over is Reagan's tear down this wall speech from June of 1987. Reagan gave the speech in front of the Berlin Wall in June of 1987. During the speech, he urged an end to the Cold War, and he stated that he dreamed of democracy spreading to those countries that were under communist rule. And he emphasized the hardships that Berliners, and particularly East Germans and East Berliners, had endured since the wall had been built in 1961, some 26 years earlier. Okay, so to understand the tear down this wall speech, you have to kind of get a feel for the end of the Cold War and the fall of the Berlin Wall. You need to know a little bit of background information on that. The dismantling of the wall began in November 1989 with the collapse of the communist East German government. For quite a while before the fall of the Berlin Wall, the East German economy was on the decline. Soviet Premier Mikhail Gorbachev had urged the East Germans to impose economic reforms like he did in the Soviet Union. Remember, he had glasnost and perestroika. Many East Germans were flocking to embassies requesting to be let into West Germany. And in November of 1989, East German leader Erich Honecker resigned, and East Germans were let into West Germany. Some people feel that Reagan's speech influenced the decline and the fall of the East German government. Do you feel that way? Delve into that if you get into this topic. Okay, the stock market crash in 1987 is the last topic you can go over. The primary document here is a YouTube video of news footage from that day, October 19th, 1987. That day when the stock market crashed is officially known as Black Monday. I shouldn't say officially, but it's known as Black Monday. Stocks plummeted a staggering 20%. The chairman of the Federal Reserve, was Alan Greenspan at the time, and he tried to slash interest rates to stop the crash from becoming worse. Before the crash of 1987, the stock market was booming and computer trading became very popular. It's called program trading or large volume stock trading over the computer. State pension funds and large institution funds put in automatic stock orders. The index arbitrage, it was what traders were using. They were using computers to determine when a stock's price would be low enough to make a wise purchase. Because the main key to making money off the stock market is you buy low and you sell high. So you want to determine when the price would be low enough to make a wise purchase. And then when you go to sell your stock, you want to determine when the stock is going to be at a good high level so you can make money. Before the stock market crash, interest rates were rising and the U.S. trade deficit was growing. October 18, 1987, investors held off and triggered buying, and they triggered a program trade. This is automatic buying or selling from large institutions. The sell-offs that resulted from the program trade led to the calling in of margin loans. A margin loan is a loan that uses stock as credit. A margin call is calling in a loan that uses stock as collateral. A large amount of margin calls caused few investors to have money to plow back into the market, and this caused the crash. Okay, so those are the 4 topics that you can delve into. Once again, there is plenty of information out there on all of these topics. Just pick the one that interests you the most. And please let me know if you have absolutely any questions. Be diligently working on this assignment, everybody. All right, have a good one and good luck.